Build the fort. What do you mean build the fort? Build the fort? What do you learn as a 10-year-old that we're going to learn from later? That's a topic of our show today. What's valuable that we learned very early on that sometimes maybe we've forgotten? Hey everybody, my name is Bill Gallagher, scaling coach and host of the Scaling Up Business Podcast. Our show comes to you every week with an interview, a conversation with an author, a thought leader, an entrepreneur about something to do with the world of growing your company. And the leadership required to get you there. So our show, you can find it wherever you're getting this one right now. YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Twitter, even, like wherever you get it. Like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, get it every week. And you can also find all of that and more at scalingcoach.com. Scalingcoach.com, right there on the screen, and in the show notes. And so scalingcoach.com is where you'll find our hundreds and hundreds of shows now on everything to do with scaling up and all of the thought leaders and that kind of thing that go into it. So if we can help you, go there. All right, let's get to our guest now. Let me bring on and introduce Chris. So Chris Heivly?
Or Heivly, but I get called lots of different things.
Heivly. With that last name, I should have asked what the pronunciation was before we got started.
You're not the first or the last. We're all good.
Chris joins us from the Raleigh-Durham area, and he's got a book, Build the Fort. 5 simple lessons you learned as a 10-year-old can help you with your startup success. Of course, we're mostly talking about scale-ups, but startups, right? You want to get started on the right foot, and those lessons still apply. They still matter here. But you should know that Chris was co-founder of MapQuest, and MapQuest sold to AOL for over $1 billion, right? And that actually is an indicator of something. And then he's the managing director of the Startup Factory. He's a sought-after public speaker. He's been an investor. He's worked with so many startups and entrepreneurs over the years. And so he's going to share some of the thoughts from the book and that kind of thing. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. I'm happy to share with your audience some stories and see where this goes.
Yeah, so let's talk about your story first. Like, what did you learn? Well, actually, before you get into that, well, why do you come up with the title for this book? What is the 10-year-old building the fort? What is that concept even?
Thanks for asking that, Bill, because it's really kind of been a roadmap for most of my adult life. I don't know about you, but I built a lot of forts as a kid. Mine were outside, right? But some people built the inside forts, right, with the blanket and the chair upside down on the couch and the
That's
broomstick.
The beginning, I think. You start indoors, then you move out to like real construction outside.
Yeah. And so what I'll tell you is I've done a number of startups with a good friend, Marshall Clark. And Marshall and I worked together. He was the original coder for MapQuest. And when you do this so long with somebody that you're very close with, you almost start to form your own language, right? Your own way of communicating. Mm-hmm. And Marshall and I, if people watch this, they would probably not understand half of what was going on, but we've worked so closely and been so good friends over the years that we almost talk in code. And one of the codes that we came up early enough when we're starting with a new idea was it's like building a fort. And it was our metaphor because the next thing we would ask is, okay, well, where are we going to steal the wood, right? What are we going to borrow from our dad's basements, right? All those kind of things you hack together as kids, right? Because Amazon.com didn't have your build a fort kit available for mom and dad to buy you.
They probably do today, right?
Though they probably do today, exactly. So Bill, like it became a way for us to kind of say, all right, how do we get this thing started? How do we start to hack at this? And so it became our metaphor. And so later on, when I was thinking of writing this and sharing some of my thoughts, I kind of remembered the cliche or the label, if you will. And then I started to kind of peel it back. And so the build the fort mindset also happens to be what I'm good at. I'm good at simplifying very complex issues. I'm good at explaining them to them. I'm good at storytelling. And I'm going to get advising about those with that methodology of like, let's get rid of all the noise as adults, right? We overanalyze, we overthink. Let's just kind of simplify this. Let's think about when we're 10 and it's a summer day and we wake up and you're my neighbor and I say, "Hey, Bill, want to build a fort?" And you say,
Absolutely. Yes. Let's build a fort.
now let's do the adult version of that. Like, you ask me, "Hey, Chris, you want to build a fort?" And I say, "Well, I don't know anything about fort building and I don't know where we're going to get the wood. And I've never hammered a nail before. And do we need screws or nails or right?" That's the adult version, right? So now apply that to starting anything, startups, whatever it is that you're motivated to be building.
You know what occurs to me right off the bat? What's the difference between the two? Right off the bat, what occurs to me is risk, stakes, something to lose. Like as a kid, or even as an adult, building a fort. Oh, the risk of loss and failure is pretty low. I don't need shelter. I'm not worried about rain coming in or that kind of thing. I'm not worried about the expenditure of materials and time. This is all play. We're doing something interesting. And then I think about, okay, let's build a business. I'm like, okay, wait. Do I want to get involved with something that's going to be successful? Do I have anything to contribute? Is this playing to my strengths? What will this do to my current income streams? Will this jeopardize any of my existing stuff? Will it put at risk my home or my nest egg in any way? Like that whole world of risk, like significantly impacts my freedom to play.
Yeah, sure. And as adults, we do have more to risk, right? We have children and houses and cars and things and maybe even soft things like reputation and ego and intellect and all of these kind of maybe more emotional pieces. And I still think it applies though. I think you can mitigate many of those things. Two things. I think you mitigate it by having a better mindset, maybe a simpler mindset, maybe a mindset of discovery. And hey, I'm not betting my entire life and career on this thing. At first, I'm just testing things out. I'm going to experiment. I'm going to see if there's something here. We all know this kind of the lean approach, right? That Eric Ries put out there. But maybe the other side of that, or maybe I also spend a lot of time writing about startup communities, right? And so maybe part of this in the build to fort mindset is about, well, maybe you can de-risk and mitigate some of that by figuring out how I play in a community so that I can learn the things that I don't know so they're not as scary. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let's pause there and then step back to where we often start, which is a little bit your journey. And I want to preface with the absolute marvel that we now take for granted. So I have GPS and mapping on my watch today, which is like, but as a pilot and a sailor, I used to think that this thing called LORAN was awesome, which is a kind of a radio navigation that gave you a point in place, but then you would go transfer that point and where you wanted to go to some kind of a paper map, and then you would plot your course and that kind of thing. And I remember having that both in boats and airplanes and thinking it was really awesome to be able to navigate with reduced visibility. And as a pilot, you've got things like VOR and like that. So you can do different kinds of radio navigation in the old days. And then I remember the first GPSs came in, and for sailing, I had a handheld GPS, and for flying, we had a panel mounted GPS. But again, it was plots and points. The first time I took that sailing, I had to go to, I had to put in, like, get a map out and then figure out what the lat long was and punch those all as waypoints in if I was going to go cruise in the Mediterranean or somewhere. And then I could bring my handheld GPS. And then I went to a CES show and I got in a car. I forget who the demo was. It was like BMW or somebody. And I saw they'd integrated mapping with GPS positioning, and I was like mind blown, like, oh my God, this is going to change everything. And I remember how I felt at that time, and now that seems ancient because it's on my phone, it's just like everywhere, it's all integrated, and it's just unbelievable. So you built a thing called MapQuest. Talk to us through some of what that journey was like and how that went. What'd you do? Who'd you build? What were you thinking?
Yeah. Well, Bill, first of all, you're talking to a guy who has an undergraduate and a master's degree in geography.
Uh-huh.
So already, I'm a cartographer, map guy, right?
Mhm.
Now, I'm also significantly old. By that, I mean, when I'm going through college, I actually ended up taking about 12 hours of computer science credit, which was unheard of at the time. So, some of the biggest ideas in the world are when you combine two things together that have never been jammed together before. And for me,
Yes.
it
A
was
remix.
computer and mapping. And
Mhm.
so that's what my jam was. Now, how that manifested itself is actually a journey of technology or applied technology. So, what most people don't know is that MapQuest, by the way, born and raised in, not me, MapQuest, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, obviously the tech capital of South Central
Tech
Pennsylvania,
Hub.
tech
Tech
hub,
Hub,
even.
Lancaster, PA.
Yeah. Um, home to like 50,000 Amish people, right? That still do horse and buggies and, no electricity. Excuse me. So here we are. We're about 50 cartographers. We're a bunch of kind of myself and a couple new age people coming in. So the first thing we do is we look at, do you remember the triptych from
Mhm.
AAA?
Mhm.
This was a little 4-inch by 9-inch spiral bound. Your mom and dad went to the AAA office. You were going from, you
Before a
know,
trip,
uh,
every time.
yeah, Poughkeepsie, New York to Disneyland on your summer, or your spring break, and mom and dad needed directions, right? And so they
Mhm.
printed out these things they called sausage links. And we just looked at that and said, that's really stupid. Now, by the way, what you don't know, or most people don't know, is that all those pages were pre-printed. And what would happen is the routes were actually already configured. So you needed to pull page 3, 16, 17, 36, and then they just put them in the spiral bound. So that's why we thought that was stupid. So we put together a highway and state route database. Because in-car navigation was eventually going to come, we knew how to build geographic databases, and we just printed those we put them on a computer and that time a high-speed 40 page per minute laser printer, which cost $10,000, and we sold that system to every auto club in the nation
Mhm.
because Sears and Montgomery Ward and Allstate all had their own auto clubs, and this was a
Mhm.
nice little add-on.
Mhm.
So desktop PC, big time laser printer, printed two colors, black and white. And so the next piece of evolution, the CD-ROM comes out in 93. Now we jam all this stuff on a CD-ROM. We're the first product out there. Now you don't have to go to AAA. Now you do it in your house. Print them out, right? Not unlike what we end up doing a little bit later when the internet became a thing. And we just took that code, kept shrinking it, and ported it to the internet. And in February 96, we launched MapQuest. And the rest is kind of history. Now, a couple things that I think you might want
It's
to know.
funny, before you move on from technology, prehistoric technology, right? I I built a SaaS business like an Uber Eats, back in the day. But we knew people didn't have mobile devices and in-car nav, and they didn't have in the restaurants either. So we built this web interface to do restaurant ordering for takeout and delivery, but the delivery was a particular focus in the timeliness of it. So you ordered online, super efficient process, like faster than picking up the phone and calling. And then we faxed the order in and verified the fax into the restaurant. And it came with it not only the order and the payment authorization, but it also came with a little embedded MapQuest route guide from the restaurant to the home so that the driver knew where to go and how to get there and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
with all the steps, that kind of thing, embedded in the fax and sent out that so that they could follow, right? They've got this fax paper that they're going to get attached to the order that they can take off and follow. But it's fascinating. Like, each step we upgrade the technology. And at that moment, it feels kind of like magic. And people were like, wow, this is so cool. You built this right into it. And of course, now it's like, why do I have a printed thing in my hand?
Right. Well, it's funny you mention that, because when I get a chance to talk in front of people and I tell my story and I tell the MapQuest story, I put up some of the first images that you would receive that you printed out. And oh my God, they're so horsey looking, the resolution so bad. And I know there's
Yes.
people in the audience going, how could you ever? And I said, but you're comparing that to today. What I
Mhm.
want you to compare it to is having to get in a car, go to a store called AAA, have some kid pull down these pages in a spiral bound. Like, by that standard, this was pretty hip, right? Your piece of paper had a little map reference for your driver. So yeah, it's just funny how
And
technology.
it just like the next stage is always can feel a little bit like magic. We used to
Yeah,
go and look for images, and if you needed an image for a particular thing, you'd say, I'm looking for somebody on a group of people standing on the seashore having a meeting, and then you might find some image out there that you could do, or you'd have to commission a photographer to go create that image for you, or an illustrator to go draw it, and that kind of thing. And so you're limited by it. And then my son's built some technology for a company that's known around the world today as Midjourney, and you can just type in your thing and boom, it creates the image for you, and it's learned to do it in an instant. So now the skill becomes, how well do I use it?
right.
And can I describe my image in a way that the AI can interpret it and throw it out to me? But like, boom,
Yeah.
mind blown.
I'm using Midjourney as the image for all my blog posts for the last 2 months.
We thank you.
Yeah. Well, just not only, I mean, I do it because I want to understand what the next piece of technology is. It's also a hell of a lot quicker than doing
So
it the other way, right?
yes, so and cool. Like there's a new class of artists and photographers and stuff that are using it as an additional tool. Our daughter is a photographer and designer. She uses the Midjourney tool as well, even though she's in that. But then she'll like layer it, composite it, and edit
Right.
and do some
Right.
things on top after. Yeah.
The magic.
Yeah.
There's always more magic.
Always more. So let's talk about some of the examples and share some of the stories and kind of learn what is it about building a fort. Start with Ricky and written word media.
Sure. So, Bill, for the last probably 12 years in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, and the last 6 years as a consultant all over the world, my new jam has been, how do I help more entrepreneurs get their success,
Yeah.
right? I can do that through investing. That's still a handful. I could do my own. That's still one. But the idea of the accelerator, right? The Techstars and the Y Combinators of the world, circa, 2009, really started to turn me on. Maybe it fueled my ADD. Now I could dabble in 10 companies instead of one. And so in my now adopted hometown of Raleigh, Durham, circa 10, 12 years ago, I put my own accelerator into play. But more importantly, I wanted to figure out how I could, at scale, help other founders succeed. And, today we kind of think of this notion as a startup community or an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Brad Feld of Foundry Group and co-owner and founder of Techstars.
Past speaker for us. Yeah.
Yeah. So, got to know Brad and David Cohn at Techstars, and then kind of started applying this in Raleigh, Durham. And, you and I both love stories. And I just a couple of weeks ago, I put a new event on, and we'll talk about that a little later. But, I was talking to Ricky. Now, Ricky Woolman was a woman who was a very good marketer. And she had been a marketer at Red Hat, I believe. And then she had left to kind of stand up her own kind of, shingle, and was consulting. And she just had the right mindset. And so I used to bring her into my accelerator, and she would do a 2 or 3 hour bit with all the, the 10 companies in our program. And they'd kind of, and she would just give freely of her time, which is part of the right mindset, right, for a good startup community. And it was funny because they started asking her a bunch of questions. And then what she realized is that magic or the technology kept changing. So,
Mhm.
for instance, Google would change their algorithm for doing advertising. And now all of a sudden, her advice and her work was put in question. So, what she did is she said, all right, I got to build my own sandbox so I can test these things continually and see how they're working so that I can take them back to my clients. And I remember sitting there talking to her. This is probably now, 4 or 5 years ago. And here Ricky decides that her sandbox has actually gotten so popular that she's going to launch a company
Mm.
based on
Mm.
it.
Mhm.
And her husband, who I knew very well, who was kind of a VP of engineering at one of our hottest startups in the area, eventually quit that and joined her. And
Mm.
today they have something called Written Word Media.
Mm.
Now, what I tell that story is the community, like it wasn't a linear kind of thing, right? So maybe because I helped bring her in and give her exposure to these startups, and she's helping all these different startups with all these different problems, as opposed to one or two or three clients, maybe that helped her kind of see a broader picture. And then maybe she decided, well, geez, I need help. And I remember sitting down with her and offering my advice on maybe how you start a company. Certainly my advice wasn't any better than anybody else's, but at least she had a community of people that she can now reach to because I was connecting people. And so this idea, if we kind of layer back a little bit, this idea of what comes first, a founder or the community, and it's really not chicken or egg. They're kind of all together. And do great communities like obviously Silicon Valley, but Seattle, Boston, New York, Austin, Texas today, Chicago up and coming, Raleigh, Durham, Miami. How do these places create this community, and how do they kind of as an outcome help foster more successful founders, which only kind of waterfalls to everyone? So I love that story, and she's a great friend today, and she and her husband are running a really cool company.
Yeah, I think, I hear a couple things in that. One of them is like, it's been said before, well, you're the average of your five closest people and that kind of thing. But and I know that like it makes great financial sense to move into a neighborhood of people that are a lot wealthier, bigger houses than you, right? But like and it's also a little humbling because you're like, wow, why am I in the little house? Why do I have the little business? But if you surround yourself with people like that, and you can manage your own feelings of inadequacy and be inspired by them to up your game, it's really powerful. And the experiences of those people and their perspectives will be really different than, just a guy in a diner kind of a conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, Bill. And in fact, you know, those people all exist, but in not very mature company or communities, you just don't have easy access. There's friction between those things. And so maybe you're stuck with the guy that was the senior vice president of the bank for 40 years. And with no judgment to him, he's never been a founder. He doesn't know the ups and downs. He's never had to cover payroll out of his 401k, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so my jam today, and the reason we told that Ricky Woolman story is how does a community impact one founder on their journey in all different places as they're scaling up? Because we all know the issues get harder and different and thornier and potentially even deadly, right?
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
kind of manage your company well, that community's there to kind of help you mitigate and learn, frankly.
So there are a million ways to F up your company, but there's very few ways to make it work. And you really are threading the needle, navigating all of the challenges of increases, the challenges of decreases, of needing to pivot, so much more. Tell us about Ed Buchholz.
Yeah. So about maybe we're coming up 2017. Is that 5 to 6 years?
Yeah,
I hook up with Brad Feld and and
yeah.
and David Cohen, and I've run my accelerator in Raleigh Durham, and I'm thinking about what I do next. And I know that there's about 14 tier two, tier three cities within 4 hours drive of Raleigh Durham that all have been kind of, hey, how did you do this? Right? Charlotte and Wilmington and Richmond and you know, Charlottesville and Norfolk, Virginia. How do you guys do this? How do we kind of create this environment? Right? This is a good thing for our economy. local and global. So I'm out in Boulder, and I'm sitting down with Brad and David, and we're just shooting the crap, and they're like, "What do you think of doing?" And I shared that story, and they said, "Well, we're thinking about doing that, but for the world. Do you want to combine forces?" And the answer is, heck yeah. I mean, if this wasn't a build the fort moment, right? I don't know what was.
100%.
Yeah, for me, what Techstars has been able to accomplish in all those cities around the world, and Brad through his books and his podcasts and all the things he gets involved in, is such a thought leader. To have a chance to work with them in order to kind of commercialize these thoughts, in order to get them out to people. So in that first year, we ran the lean playbook. I was a lone soldier. We didn't hire anybody. We didn't do marketing and any of that crap. We just started talking to people, and I probably talked to about 75 people in that first year. And we did 5 pilots, little 3-month things. We're kind of trying to build our model about how do we assess and then communicate the gaps and the next steps for those community leaders. And Bill, we did it from Fort Wayne, Indiana to Lima, Peru, and then Cleveland, Ohio. And Ed Buchholz was in Cleveland, Ohio. And interesting enough, Ed and his company had gone through a Techstars program. And Ed was probably 3 years, I'm thinking, into that journey. Yet at the same time, he was figuring out how to bring people together in Cleveland to build a better community. I believe Ed went through the Techstars program in Boulder. So he parachuted in and saw this wonderful, well-connected, well-oiled community machine. And then he goes back to Cleveland, and it's not so much. Again, no judgment on Cleveland. It just wasn't that mature. And so the Ed story is about, how do you play your role as a founder, which has a lot of pressure, and it's not like you got a lot of extra time, but at the same time, understand that if you invest some of your time in trying to build a community and bring in people together, that it not only helps the community, it may help Ed himself, because now he's got access to resources and knowledge and experiences. And how does that roll over? And so I worked in Cleveland for 3 months, and again, I consider Ed a friend today. He ended up having to shut down that company. It didn't make it. I guess we would call that a failure. Ed's now working for Facebook and is an awesome coder and a UI specialist. But he's still back in Cleveland, kind of seeing what he can do to stir the pot. And I'm sure he's got another startup in there somewhere.
That's a really, really interesting thing. Like, some people are like, "Oh, let's not talk about that when that company failed." No, let's talk about that. I think our value as entrepreneurs, as coaches, as thought leaders is as much built in the successes as we've had as the failures, and and we don't pay enough attention to that. I can tell you about some great marketing moves I did in different companies in the connecting thread, but I can also tell you about the ways that we tried to do them that went really badly. And then what we learned from that and how we carry that forward into things. And both are really important to learn from, not just the brilliant moves, but the failures as well, because you may not be able to reproduce or use the brilliant thing you did in one place, or your coach or your advisor or somebody else did. It might not work for you, but the underlying idea and the approach, the process of both of them that we can learn from. How did I go wrong there? What did I go right there? That nets out to something pretty powerful, doesn't it?
No doubt. And we, you're right. We either don't talk about it, or we give it kind of a cute lip service, like, "Oh yeah, failure's okay, and we have to embrace failure." But that's always good for the other guy, right? But here we are, right? I mean, this is a crapshoot, right? Like, how many companies get started and don't make it a year or 2 years, right? Using Ed as an example. So the question is, how are we going to look at that thing? I still view almost everything I do as an experiment, one long experiment, and experiments fail. In fact, failure teaches you something that, all right, don't do that next time, right? So, whether they're actually company failures, or whether they're campaign failures, or whether they're hiring failures, let's just assume you're going to have a bunch of them. And what's your mindset to take care of them? Let's bring it back to a fort, right? We go to build a wall and it's all cattywampus, right? So like, do the kids like start crying as a kid, a 10-year-old, right? What do? You probably tear it down and rebuild it again, or bend it to fix it, right? So, again, back to that 10-year-old mentality. Maybe let's not take ourselves so seriously. Maybe not worry so much about what failure means. Maybe embrace it, that it's a learning, that's just an experiment that failed. I don't know. Just a few.
Well, think about in building the Mercury and Apollo programs at NASA, they blew up some rockets, and lately, SpaceX has been blowing up a whole lot of rockets, and in fact, in their latest launch, right, they blew up another rocket, and before the launch, Elon Musk says, well, maybe 50-50. And he's definitely on the optimistic side of things on a pretty regular basis. He calls it 50-50. It's maybe got a 20% chance of working out quickly. But
Right.
they're like, but it's important to launch it. We expect this thing's going to blow up somewhere. It's not going to complete its whole mission. Be awesome if it did, but probably it's going to blow up. And then we're going to learn something from that and apply something to that. If we related to it, like, I'm going to try a bunch of different marketing things. Most of them are going to fail, but I'm not going to expend everything I've got. We're going to learn something from it. We're going to find the one that really works and then figure out like what's okay. And you need to iterate and tweak and evolve, fail fast, fail forward, right, is the startup lesson.
Yeah. So what's interesting, in the latest book I just released, was Build the Fort, the Startup Community Builders Field Guide, which riffs off of Brad Feld's latest, one of the latest books on this topic, called The Startup Community Way.
Yeah.
We've uncovered some science, and the science is systems theory. And the idea in systems theory, and I'm going to do the really short version, which comes back to rockets, by the way, which is that there's a complicated mindset and a complex mindset. The complicated mindset is like sending a rocket to the moon. Your job is to figure out every variable, to make sure that everything's connected, to reverse engineer all the potential problems that could come out of it. And even then, there's not 100% predictability.
Right.
But there's many people in this world who have mastered the muscles of running in a complicated system. They're typically very hierarchical and very structured. Government, large corporations, colleges and universities.
Right.
I think to be an entrepreneur and to be involved in startup community building, you have to adopt a complex mindset. And the complex mindset starts with the ideas: stop trying to control everything, because you control almost nothing, right? And once you have that set, then you get to approach everything in terms of iterations, right? I know we don't know what the specifics are, but you and I both know that Elon and team learned a lot from that last rocket. So increase the chances to 40% next time, right? And so that's the approach, which actually seems to mirror the build the fort idea as well.
Yeah. And right, there's a whole bunch of people working on things in different aspects in different ways, and we're trying to coordinate, but we're not trying to control everything, and we just want to get a little bit better until at some point, like, we can reuse rockets and land them again and recover them, and now we've actually done something that's truly remarkable.
Right. But it's a journey, isn't it?
It really is. I think about, and I'm deep in the middle of writing a book now that I've been working on for some time, and one of the things that I've spoken about frequently and is in the book is a multi-million-dollar mistake that I made. And when I look back at it, right, I think of like multiple lessons from that, right? And although I have coaches all the time in that area, in that aspect of that business, I didn't have somebody coaching me. It wasn't an area that I got things. We had new systems, we had new people. We didn't apply all of the things that I knew to apply, weren't being used. There were things I was ignoring, right? That's really valuable to learn from and to apply. And although that's a sting, that's money out of my retirement fund, right?
Still stings, doesn't it?
But I now use that with everyone that I work with, and I've worked with thousands of people over the last 10 years. And right, so it becomes a gift to all those people. That's an investment in learning that
Right.
we need to get some return on.
I can't wait to read it. So,
Talk to us about Laura.
yeah.
What's
So,
Laura's story?
yeah. So Laura, she's just one of my favorite people in the world, and I love her company called Van Robotics. So I'm kind of mostly retired, semi-retired. I don't know what the hell that word means. I'm just not building businesses anymore, but
You
I'm staying
sound like a
active.
retired guy. How's your golf game?
It's still as shitty as it always has been. But I'm up here in North Carolina. We've done a great job in the Raleigh-Durham area of really kind of helping to form an unbelievable startup ecosystem. But I got talking to a few old friends. I'm an alumni of the University of South Carolina, and a couple friends called about a year and a half ago and said, "We need help. I know you've helped cities all over the world do this. We're little old Columbia, South Carolina. We're probably pretty behind. Could you come down and help us?" So, you know, from my perspective, it's kind of, the pandemic was kind of coming to its end, and or at least the version as we know it today. And I didn't have to get on a plane, right? I could drive down there. It's a little over 2 hours. And so I've been heading down there, almost once a week for a while, then every 2 weeks, now about every now 3 to 4 weeks, and just helping them to kind of figure out a way to form a little, a small to start with, but a small little flywheel of entrepreneurs that can work together. And so that's where I met Laura. Laura's not, I want to be good to Laura. Laura's been around the block. She's of our age or so. But she's got an AI.
So fantastically.
She's right in her zone right now, right? And so Laura's had a company for a number of years called Van Robotics, and she's built
Van Robotics?
Van.
Oh,
Van.
Van.
And she's built an 18-inch robot, I believe. Geez, I should know this. I think it's called Abdi. And it teaches kids reading and maybe some math, and she's adding to that. And she goes in and sells that to school districts around the country, because we all know kids don't learn the same way, right? A lot of kids are introverts. They're afraid to ask questions. But here is this very engaging robot that's a tutor, basically. And so, I've been, working with her.
Cool. Yeah.
We helped kind of create or restart an entrepreneurial service organization. I convinced her to join the board of directors because I want to give her more awareness. I want to help her grow her company, but I also want her lessons to kind of waterfall down to the rest of the community. Here's a very nascent community who probably doesn't think that you could start an AI robotics company in Columbia, South Carolina. But here's Laura, right? Not only with Abby, but herself, and not a traditional, a woman, an older woman, right? And that's, to me, what entrepreneurship is about, is that it's equal access for everyone. It's very inclusive. And so she's really been a poster child for us in Columbia.
Yeah, you need a little gumption, a little chutzpah, a little nerve, something to go out, right, and start a business. It's a affliction, a mental disease even.
It certainly is.
It's a bad habit to go out and do this. It'd be much easier to work for someone else, I think, a lot of time. But there is something about that. And the cool thing about not being in a Silicon Valley, and it's funny, my home is in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm actually up in Seattle now, another kind of a tech hub. It didn't get much cheaper here. Well, a tiny bit cheaper. The taxes are a tiny bit better, but no, I'm about 50 feet from Lake Washington out that window there. Look, in these places, it's actually kind of it's expensive to live. It's expensive to hire people. It's expensive to operate. But if you get to some of these other places, South Carolina, North Carolina, Ohio, profoundly different cost of hiring and retaining talent. And now there isn't as many people, right? You want some full stack, blah, blah, blah. you're not going to find as many there, but they're going to be a lot more grateful, a lot more affordable. And some of them, really want to live away from a place that is so go, 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 like San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, the pandemic actually exacerbated all this, right? And the remote working
Right.
capability. So, I kind of say the last 10 plus years of my life has been trying to democratize entrepreneurship
Yeah.
and maybe to some level democratize capital. And you can see, the capital landscape changing, still obviously predominantly in the Valley and New York and Boston, and then Seattle and Austin and some other places.
Right.
But it's moving. And
Right.
at least in the startup through some level of scaling, you can probably do that in any city that has at least 500,000 to 1 million people in it, right? There's enough resources, knowledge, experiences that you can find that could help you hopefully make a few more better decisions than not. And that's what the community's there for, right? That's why I want this to happen in, Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Lima, Peru, and Cleveland, Ohio, and Raleigh, Durham, and on and on and on. Now, at some point, maybe you got to pick up and go to New York or the Valley. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
But you want to show people that there's an opportunity to be a really good and scaled entrepreneur, and that's my mission right now.
Absolutely. So let me shout out buildthefort.com. You want to find out more, get the book, learn about his work, his community, buildthefort.com. There it is, right on the screen. It'll be in the show notes as well. But it's easy to remember if you're driving or working out right now. Buildthefort.com. Fantastic metaphor for it, and a great conversation. So much more that we could have covered, but we are pretty much at time. So big shout out to my friend and mentor, Vern Harnish, who wrote the Rockefeller Habits and created the scaling up framework that we use in our coaching, and is really responsible for everything to do with this show today. And then to Wanda Mitchell, our show producer, getting our guests ready and our show prepared and out the door every week. The folks at Podfly Productions, who edit our audio, create our show notes and all that kind of thing. Thanks again to everyone for watching, for listening. If you want to drop us a note, send email to info@scalingcoach.com. We love to hear what topics you'd like us to go into more or less. If you really dug something, please let us know. We'll give you more of it. If you hated something, that's okay too. Tell us that sucked, Bill. You should stop talking about X, Y, or Z. It's totally fine. And if we can help you find a resource in your area, want to find out more about our workshops, our boot camps, or any of that stuff, scalingcoach.com is where all of that is listed. Thanks again, everyone, for listening, for watching. Like, subscribe, give us a review. All that stuff is really cool. Until then, keep scaling up. Talk to you soon.